There are many ways to die, but some deaths are so brutal, so inhuman, that they are remembered for centuries. Some executions were designed to be swift, others to be painful, but then there were those meant to send a message. A message written in blood, in suffering, in the slow, agonizing destruction of the human body. This is the story of the Blood Eagle, the cruelest death in history. But before that, let's talk more about Viking history. They came with the wind, cutting through the waves in their long ships, moving faster than any army before them. To some they were demons, a force of destruction that appeared out of nowhere and left only fire and death behind. To others, they were the gods of war, fearless men who lived by the sword and died by it. But who were the Vikings really? Were they nothing more than raiders, bloodthirsty savages who lived for battle? Or was there something more behind the axes, the shields, and the war cries that echoed through history? Let's go back to the Viking Age, from 750 to 1050 AD, a time when the world trembled under the might of these Norse warriors. The Vikings were not a single army, not a nation, not even a unified people. They came from the lands of Scandinavia, modern-day Norway, Sweden, and Denmark, where frozen fjords, dense forest, and brutal winters shaped them into survivors. Life in the north was not easy, food was scarce. The cold could kill as easily as a sword. If you wanted to survive, you had to be strong. If you wanted to thrive, you had to fight. And fight they did. From the late 8th century, the Vikings exploded onto the world stage. Their long ships, sleek and deadly, allowed them to strike deep into foreign lands before vanishing back into the sea. They raided the coasts of England, France, Ireland, and even as far as Spain and North Africa. They sailed across the North Atlantic, discovering Iceland, Greenland, and even North America, centuries before Columbus. They marched through the rivers of Eastern Europe and Russia, trading, conquering, and founding cities. Some even became bodyguards for the Byzantine emperors in Constantinople, feared warriors known as the Varangian Guard. They were warriors, but they were also explorers, traders, farmers, and kings. Their gods demanded strength, but their way of life demanded wisdom, resilience, and cunning. For the Vikings, war was not just about survival, it was about glory. Their entire world was built around strength, reputation, and the idea that a man's fate was decided by his own actions. To die in battle was not a tragedy, but an honor. It meant a warrior could feast in the great halls of Valhalla alongside the gods until the end of time. But not all deaths were equal. To die weak, helpless, or forgotten was the worst fate imaginable. A Viking's death had to mean something. It had to be remembered. This is why warriors fought so fiercely, why they took great pride in their deeds, their scars, their legends. Their names had to live on, sung by skalds, carved into stone, and whispered by their descendants. But there was something even worse than a meaningless death, a dishonorable death. Betrayal, humiliation, and disgrace were crimes that could not be ignored. In Viking culture, vengeance was not just expected, it was demanded. If a man was wronged, his family was bound by honor to seek justice. Blood had to be paid with blood. A warrior who let an enemy walk away without revenge would be seen as weak, and weakness was unacceptable. This is where the Vikings became something more than just warriors. They became judges, executioners, and legends all in one. Most warriors simply died on the battlefield. Some were executed with a sword or a quick thrust of a spear. But for those who had committed unforgivable sins, who had killed a great leader, who had wronged an entire clan, who had taken something that could not be repaid, death was not enough. A message had to be sent, and so the Vikings created a form of execution so terrifying, so brutal, so inhuman that its very existence is debated to this day. A death so horrifying that it could make even the bravest warrior tremble. It was not just about killing an enemy, it was about erasing them, about making sure that their death was remembered not as an act of courage, but as an act of punishment, horror, and suffering. It was called the Blood Eagle. So get ready, because what you're about to hear is not for the faint of heart. Imagine the scene. The cold wind howls through the trees, carrying the scent of damp earth and fresh blood. Torches flicker, casting long shadows over the gathered warriors, their faces carved from stone, their eyes hungry for vengeance. A single man kneels in the center, his breath ragged, his wrists bound. He knows what is coming. He has heard the whispers, he has seen the fear in the eyes of those who spoke of it. But nothing could prepare him for what is about to happen. The Blood Eagle was not a simple execution. It was not meant to be quick or clean or forgettable. It was a spectacle, a performance of pain and power, a ritual of vengeance and horror, and for the man who found himself beneath the blade, there was no escaping what came next. It always began the same way. The victim was captured, dragged in chains to the place of execution. He was no ordinary man. No common thief or nameless warrior would be granted such a death. The Blood Eagle was reserved for the most hated enemies, those whose crimes were too great to be answered with a mere beheading or a slit throat. A rival king, a traitor, the slayer of a father or brother, someone who had taken a life that could never be replaced. And so he was laid down, not on soft earth, but on cold, unyielding stone, face down and with arms stretched wide, exposed, vulnerable. The gathered warriors stood in silence. The executioner, sometimes a chieftain, sometimes a king, sometimes the very man who had lost a father or brother, stepped forward. He did not speak. There were no words left to say. Only steel would speak now. The blade touched the skin. A single deep cut ran from the base of the neck to the lower back, slicing through skin and flesh with terrifying ease. The pain would have been blinding, but it was only the beginning. The real horror was yet to come. The executioner worked methodically, severing each rib from the spine one by one. It was not a quick process. The ribs, strong and curved, had to be broken or sliced apart. Each crack, each snap echoed through the night. The victim would still be alive at this point, still feeling every single moment of it. Then came the part that made the Blood Eagle more than just a killing. The executioner reached inside and with brutal precision pulled the lungs through the gaping wounds, the wings of the eagle. Some say that this was the final stroke of cruelty, that the lungs, once freed from the ribcage, would flutter as the victim gasped for breath, creating the illusion of a bird trying to take flight. Others argue that death would have come too quickly, that the pain, the blood loss, the sheer shock to the body would have stolen the victim's life before the lungs ever moved. But one thing was certain. It was agony beyond imagination. Yet for the victim, there was something even more terrifying than the pain. Something worse than the slow tearing of flesh, the pulling of bones, the final moments of drowning in his own blood. It was the silence. Because the legend said that if a man screamed, if even a single cry of pain left his lips, he would be denied Valhalla, the great hall of fallen warriors. He would never feast among the gods. He would never see Odin's halls or fight in Ragnarok. But if he endured it in silence, if he took the suffering without a sound, he would die as a true warrior. But how could anyone endure such a death without a scream? Some say no, that no man could endure his own body being torn apart in absolute silence, that in the end the pain would break even the strongest. Others say that a true Viking, a man of honor, a man of the old ways, could. You now must be wondering, who were the men unfortunate enough to suffer this fate? Who were the warriors or kings who found themselves face down on the cold, unyielding ground with an open back? As we already mentioned, the Blood Eagle was not for the common man. It was not a punishment for thieves or cowards. It was reserved for the greatest enemies, the most hated rivals, the men whose death needed to be remembered, and among those names two stand above the rest. One was a prince, a son of a mighty king, betrayed and butchered in an act of revenge. The other, a king himself, a ruler who faced the wrath of a Viking legend's sons and paid the ultimate price. These were not just men, they were symbols. Their deaths were not just punishment, They were messages carved into flesh. His name was Halfdan Harleg, or Halfdan Longleg, a prince of Norway, the son of the great King Harald Fairhair, the first ruler to unite the warring clans of the north. But the blood of kings is not always enough to protect a man from fate. Halfdan's story was not one of glory, it was one of ruthless vengeance. He had crossed the wrong man. The man's name was Torf-Einarr, a fierce warrior and ruler of the Orkney Islands. Once these lands had belonged to Ragnvald Einar's father, but Halfdan and his brother had taken them by force, burning Ragnvald alive. It was a crime that would not go unanswered. Torf-Einarr bided his time, gathering his men, waiting for the right moment, and when it came he struck with fury. Halfdan was captured, defenseless, outmatched and alone. But a simple death would not do. He had killed a nobleman, stolen lands that were not his, and murdered a father in fire and blood. His fate had to be greater than death itself. And so the blood eagle was carved into his back. Some say Einar did it himself, that he stood over Halfdan with a blade in hand, slicing open the prince's back, one rib at a time. That he worked carefully, methodically, not for cruelty's sake, but as an offering to the gods. For this was not just an execution, it was a sacrifice. Odin, the All-Father, the god of war and wisdom, demanded blood, and Einar gave it to him. As Halfdan's lungs were pulled from his chest, as his body lay broken and lifeless, his soul was sent to the halls of the gods, not as a hero, but as a warning to all who would dare cross Torf-Einarr. But if one blood eagle is spoken of more than any other, if one name has been etched into legend, it is King Aella of Northumbria. His crime? He had killed a legend. The story begins with Ragnar Lothbrok, one of the most feared and celebrated Vikings of all time. A warrior so fierce, so unstoppable, that his name alone was enough to strike fear into the hearts of kings. But even legends can fall. Captured by King Aella of Northumbria, Ragnar was condemned to die, but not by the sword nor by fire. His death would be slower, crueler. He was thrown into a pit of venomous snakes. There, surrounded by writhing bodies and biting fangs, Ragnar Lothbrok met his end. But before he died, he spoke words that would haunt Aella forever. The little pigs will grunt when they hear how the old boar suffered. It was a warning, a prophecy, because Ragnar had sons. And those sons were coming for revenge. The great heathen army arrived in 866 AD, an unstoppable force of Viking warriors who swept through Northumbria like a storm. They cut down Aella's men, they crushed his armies, and then when there was nothing left but a broken king and a battlefield soaked in blood, they captured the man who had killed their father. And they did not give him a warrior's death. They did not let him fight. They did not let him beg. Instead, they laid him down and they carved the blood eagle into his back. Some say he screamed, others say he took his suffering like a king, but in the end it did not matter. His death was more than just revenge, it was a legend, a story passed down through generations, because when the Vikings take their revenge, they do not just kill, they make sure the world remembers. Some people even say that this event was not real, but let's be honest here. Things like this don't just appear in history for no reason. Myths don't survive for centuries unless there's something behind them. The Blood Eagle wasn't just a scary bedtime story or an exaggerated tale whispered around Viking fires. It was documented, it was described, and it was feared. For centuries, scholars and historians have argued over the truth of it. Could the Vikings really have done this? Could a man actually endure such a death, or was it all just a misunderstanding? A trick of words and poetry twisted over time. Let's take a look at the evidence. The Blood Eagle appears in 9 medieval sources written in both Old Norse and Latin. Some of these accounts are detailed, describing the process of cutting open the back, breaking the ribs, and pulling out the lungs. Others mention that only an eagle was carved into the victim, leaving out the gruesome details. But here's the thing, none of these sources are actually first-hand accounts. Every mention of the Blood Eagle comes from texts written hundreds of years after the events they describe. The Vikings themselves didn't leave behind written records of their rituals. Their history was told in skaldic poetry, passed down through song and spoken word, each storyteller adding their own touch to the legend. And skaldic poetry? It was complicated, symbolic, and filled with hidden meanings. Some scholars believe that when these poets spoke of carving an eagle into someone's back, They didn't mean it literally. They argued that it was just a poetic way of describing a particularly violent and humiliating death. Maybe the eagle was a metaphor for leaving a warrior's body torn open on the battlefield, scavenged by birds. Maybe the image of the wings wasn't meant to be taken as a physical act, but as a symbol of the victim being offered up to Odin, the god of war. But does this mean the blood eagle never happened? Well, skeptics argue there is no physical evidence of the blood eagle. No skeletons have been found with their ribs separated from the spine, no bones showing clear signs of this particular ritual. But if the Vikings really practiced it, wouldn't we have found at least one victim buried somewhere? But think about it. If the blood eagle was a public execution, a display of power and vengeance, why would they bury the bodies? Those were not warriors who deserved proper burials. They were enemies, traitors, kings who had been humiliated and erased. What if the Vikings simply left the bodies behind, exposed to the elements? What if they were burned, thrown into the sea, or dumped into the woods where animals would ensure that there was nothing left to find? The lack of evidence doesn't prove it didn't happen, it only proves that, if it did, the Vikings left no trace. Even if the texts are exaggerated, could a blood eagle actually be performed? Would it be even physically possible? The answer is yes. Recent medical research has shown that if done quickly and with precision, a blood eagle could have been performed before the victim died. The ribs could be cut away from the spine using Viking weapons, and while the pain and blood loss would be beyond anything imaginable, death might not have come instantly. And if anyone could have done it, it was the Vikings. They were expert hunters, butchers, and warriors. They knew how to carve flesh, how to separate bone, how to dismember bodies in the most efficient way possible. Their entire world revolved around violence, anatomy, and survival. If they wanted to carve open a man's back and shape his ribs into wings, there is no doubt they could. Whether or not the blood eagle happened exactly as described, there is one undeniable truth. The Vikings wanted people to believe it did. They wanted their enemies to tremble at the thought of capture. They wanted kings to wake up in the middle of the night in a cold sweat, picturing themselves on the stone, their backs split open, their lungs exposed to the air. Centuries have passed since the last Viking longship touched the shores of a foreign land. The warriors of the north are gone, their swords rusted, their battles long over, but the blood eagle, its terror, its legend, refuses to die. Even today, the mere mention of it sends shivers down spines. It has become a symbol of ultimate brutality, a haunting reminder of what human beings are capable of, and in modern times, its legend has only grown stronger. It has slashed its way into movies, television, and video games, keeping the nightmare alive. In the hit TV series Vikings, the blood eagle is brought to life in horrifying detail. The execution of Jarl Borg, one of Ragnar Lothbrok's enemies, is shown in a scene so graphic, so gut-wrenching, that even hardened viewers flinched. The camera lingers on every cut, every gasp, every silent scream. It is not just a death, it is a performance, a moment of power and fear. Video games have embraced the horror. Assassin's Creed Valhalla, a game steeped in Viking culture, does not shy away from the blood eagle. It appears as a method of execution, a brutal tool of vengeance that leaves no room for mercy. Players feel the weight of history, the violence of the past. And yet, despite all the debate, despite the arguments over whether it was real or just a legend spun from poetry and fear, one thing is clear. The blood eagle may belong to the past, but its shadow still stretches over the present. It was terror made real, a punishment so brutal that even today it stands as one of the most horrifying ways a person could die. And that's why we still talk about it, because cruelty like this doesn't just fade into history, it carves itself into memory, into legend, into nightmares. Thank you for exploring this dark chapter of the past with me today. Until next time, remember, history is written in blood, and some pages are darker than others. Goodbye.